This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program on tonight's headlines.
President Duterte decided to place Metro Manila under lockdown next week, prompted by a rise in new COVID cases in the national capital region.
Japan extended a virus state of emergency in Tokyo and expanded the measure to 4 more regions as it battles a record surge in infections a week into the pandemic-postponed Olympics.
President Duterte has restored a pact governing the presence of U.S. troops in the Philippines.
And the latest in the Tokyo Olympics.
First, governments around the world are racing to head off a surge in coronavirus cases driven by the Delta variant. Here in the Philippines, President Duterte decided to place Metro Manila under lockdown next week, prompted by a rise in new COVID cases in the national capital region. In preparation for the ECQ, the government started implementing stricter quarantine measures in NCR from July 30th to August 5. Let's listen in.
Inaprubahan po ng Presidente ang rekomendasyon ng inyong IETF na ilagay ang National Capital Region sa ilalim ng General Community Quarantine subject to heightened and additional restrictions. Ito ay magsisimula ngayong araw hanggang 5 ng Agosto. Ngayong araw po hanggang 5 ng Agosto. Simula sa 6 naman ng Agosto, ang NCR ay may escalate sa Enhanced Community Quarantine or ECQ hanggang 20 ng Agosto 2021. Ito po ay 6 to 20th August 2021, ECQ po ang NCR+. Hindi po naging madali ang desisyon nito ha. Maraming oras ang ginugol para pagdebatihan ng bagay nito dahil binabalanse nga po natin yung pagpapabagal ng pagkalat ng COVID-19 dahil sa Delta variant at yung karapatan natin na mabuhay at mabawasan ang hanay ng mga nagugutom. Pero matapos po ang matinding debate, kinakailangan magkaroon ng desisyon. Masakit na desisyon po natin to dahil alam nating mahirap ang ECQ, pero kinakailangan gawin po ito para maiwasan yung kakulangan ng ating mga ICU beds at iba pang hospital requirements kung lolobo po talaga ang kaso dahil nga po sa Delta variant. Sa huli, ang inisip ng lahat ay ang kailangan gawin na ang hirap na desisyon na ito para mas maraming buhay ang maligtas. Tulad ng aking sinabi, ang binanggit kong heightened restrictions sa NCR ay mag-take effect ngayong araw. Mas mahigpit po ito, kaya nga sabi ko heightened restrictions na meron pang additional restrictions no, sa NCR compared sa GCQ with heightened restrictions sa ibang mga lugar. Kasama rito ang pagbabawal sa indoor dine-in services at alfresco dining. Wala na muna hong indoor dining, pati po alfresco dining. No? Ang pwede lamang po ay take-out at delivery. Sa mga pumasok sa araw na ngayong ganitong establishmento, yung mga nandun na po sa mga restaurants, no? Wag po kayo mag-alala. Pwede kayong magbukas hanggang mamayang gabi. Bukas po magiging epektibo yung pagbabawal sa lahat ng dine-in at alfresco dining. Okay. NCR lang po ang ECQ ha. Uulitin ko po, NCR lang po ang ECQ. NCR lang po ang ECQ. Samantala, pinayagan ng personal care services tulad ng beauty salons, beauty parlors, barbershops at nail spas hanggang 30% ng venue or seating capacity. Samantala, ang indoor sports courts at venues at indoor tourist attractions at specialized markets ng Department of Tourism ay hindi rin po makaka-operate. Pinapayagan naman ang outdoor tourist attractions hanggang 30% venue capacity. Ang pinapayagan lamang na bumiyahe sa labas at loob ng NCR Plus areas kasama ang Cavite, Bulacan, Laguna at Rizal ay ang authorized persons outside the residences or APOR na tinatawag. Tanging virtual religious gatherings lang po ang pinapayagan. Ibig sabihin, lahat po ng mass gatherings, bawal po muna. Ang lamay at libing ng mga namatay na ang dahilan ay hindi COVID-19 ay pinapayagan, pero ito po ay para sa mga immediate family members lamang. Ang ilang probisyon ng Omnibus Guidelines na hindi apektado ng mga nasabing restrictions ay magpapatuloy kasama na operasyon ng pampublikong transportasyon. Patuloy nating ipopromote ang paggamit ng active transportation. Samantala, ang Hinog City, Iloilo City, Iloilo Province at Cagayan de Oro City ay mananatiling ECQ simula August 1 hanggang August 7, 2021. Nadagdag naman po ang Cebu City at Cebu Province sa mga lugar na nasa Modified Enhanced Community Quarantine or MECQ simula 1 hanggang 15 na Agosto, subject sa mga apela ng local government units. Sa Luzon, Ilocos Norte at Bataan. Sa Visayas, Mandaue City at Lapu-Lapu City ay MECQ mula Agosto 1 hanggang Agosto 15. Under GCQ with heightened restrictions naman po mula August 1 hanggang August 15 ang Ilocos Sur, Cagayan, Bulacan, Cavite, Rizal, Laguna at Lucena City sa Region 4A at Naga City sa Luzon. Antique, Aklan, Bacolod City at Capiz sa Region 6 at Negros Oriental sa Visayas. Zamboanga del Sur, Misamis Oriental, Davao City, Davao del Norte, Davao Occidental at Davao de Oro sa Region 11 at Butuan City sa Mindanao. Samantala, ang Baguio City at Apayao sa Cordillera Administrative Region, Santiago City, Quirino, Isabela at Nueva Vizcaya sa Region 2, Batangas at Quezon sa Region 4A at Puerto Princesa sa Laguna, Guimaras at Negros Occidental sa Region 6, Zamboanga Sibugay, Zamboanga City, Zamboanga del Norte sa Region 9, Davao Oriental at Davao del Sur sa Region 11, General Santos City, Sultan Kudarat, Sarangani, North Cotabato at South Cotabato sa Region 12, Agusan del Norte, Agusan del Sur, Surigao del Norte, Surigao del Sur, at Dinagat Island sa Caraga at Cotabato sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Mindanao ay GCQ sa buong buwan ng Agosto. Ang mga lugar na hindi po natin nabanggit ay mapapasailalim sa Modified General Community Quarantine or MGCQ sa buong buwan ng Agosto.
The Octa Research Group has recommended the implementation of a 2-week lockdown in NCR amid rising COVID cases, and the research group suspected the presence of the more contagious Delta variant of COVID causing severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS-CoV-2, is contributing to the rising increase in infections in the region, similar to what happened in other countries like India and Indonesia. The Delta variant is more infectious and fatal compared to other variants of the SARS-CoV-2.
Staying here in the Philippines, the Department of Health reported 2,854 new recoveries from COVID-19, bringing the country's total to 1,491,182. In its latest COVID-19 bulletin, the DOH said this translates to a 94.3% recovery rate out of a total 1,580,824 infections since the start of the pandemic last year. The country also logged 8,562 new cases of COVID-19, with active cases now at 61,920, or 3.9% of all reported cases in the country. Of these active cases, the majority, at 94%, have mild symptoms, followed by those with severe symptoms at 2.1%, those with moderate symptoms at 1.49%, while those asymptomatic and in critical condition are at 1.2% each.
Staying in the country, all leisure tourism has been suspended in the National Capital Region starting today as the government braced for an increasing number of COVID Delta variant cases. per a Business Mirror report. In a new statement, Tourism Secretary Bernadette Romulo Puyat said, in the interim week under the GCQHR, point-to-point flights for leisure are suspended, effective immediately. Meanwhile, the Department of Tourism said in its new statement, beginning today, indoor tourist attractions are not allowed to operate and staycations are prohibited. However, those who have already checked in for their stays in staycation hotels as of July 29 may continue their stay until the last day of their original booking. Starting August 1, social events and meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions will continue to be prohibited according to the DOT. Dining in restaurant establishments, whether indoor or al fresco, is banned starting August 1.
In other news, police in Australia's largest city have requested military help to enforce a coronavirus lockdown as infections in Sydney reached a new record Thursday. Commissioner Fuller said police were now concerned about infected people not staying home. This morning, ABC reports that police went to check on a 35-year-old man from Granville who recently tested positive to COVID-19, but found he was not at home. They were told the man was at a work site in Parramatta, but subsequent inquiries revealed the man was not at work, but at another home in Constitution Hill. Commissioner Fuller warned anyone with the virus to expect a knock on the door from police. Meanwhile, Premier Gladys Berejiklian has warned anyone planning to attend an anti-lockdown protest in Sydney tomorrow could be giving their loved ones a death sentence.
Can I please warn against anybody taking up illegal activity and protesting tomorrow? Your actions will hurt, forget about the rest of us, but you could be taking the disease home and passing it on to your parents, your siblings, your brothers and sisters, or anybody you might have limited contact with in your workplace. Do not give those you love the most a death sentence. This Delta strain is contagious, it's deadly, and it's affecting people of all ages.
Special rules will apply to Australians who get vaccinated. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says as he sketched out a long road to lifting virus restrictions. Morrison indicated that when 70% of eligible adults have received 2 doses, vaccinated residents will have more freedom from domestic restrictions. Let's hear more.
We will ease restrictions in Phase B on vaccinated residents. The details of that are still to be worked through. They're still to be determined. So those matters have not been settled, and we've established a small working group involving the Northern Territory, Victoria and Tasmania, and they will lead the work on that process with their officials and those premiers, bringing back to the National Cabinet a set of recommendations as to what the options will be for those different arrangements for vaccinated residents in Phase B. So if you get vaccinated, there will be special rules that apply to you. Why? Because if you're vaccinated, you present less of a public health risk. You are less likely to get the virus, you are less likely to transmit it, you are less likely to get a serious illness and be hospitalised, and you are less likely to die.
A year and a half after Australia cocooned itself off from the rest of the pandemic-ravaged world, Morrison unveiled a series of targets he said could begin to be reached by the end of the year. In March 2020, Australia took the unprecedented step of almost entirely closing its borders to foreign visitors and banning its globe-trotting citizens from leaving. 16 months and several lockdowns on, there are currently around 6 million Australians under stay-at-home orders, most residing in COVID-hit Sydney as authorities battle to get back to COVID-0.
President Joe Biden stepped up actions to combat the spread of COVID-19's surging Delta variant. He asked every U.S. federal worker to either declare they are fully vaccinated or wear masks and be tested. Those who do not declare they are fully vaccinated will be required to wear a mask on the job, regardless of location, physically distance from co-workers, and be tested either once or twice a week. Biden said he is directing the Pentagon to study adding COVID vaccinations to its list of required immunizations for members of the U.S. military. He also called on state and local governments to offer $100 as an incentive for holdouts to get vaccinated, a nod to what the White House described as successful cash for jab efforts already implemented in some states. Take a look.
We have the tools to prevent this new wave of COVID from shutting down our businesses, our schools, our society, as we saw happen last year. Employers, this costs you nothing. If you haven't given employees paid time off, do it now, please. Today, I'm announcing we're taking this a step further. The federal government will now reimburse those employers to give their staffs time off, not only to get themselves vaccinated, but also to get their family members vaccinated. I'm calling on all states and local governments to use funding they have received, including from the American Rescue Plan, to give $100 to anyone who gets fully vaccinated. I know the paying people to get vaccinated might sound unfair to folks who've gotten vaccinated already. But here's the deal. If incentives help us beat this virus, I believe we should use them. We all benefit.
Help them recover.
The Centers for Disease Control reports that nearly 50% of U.S. counties have a high level of community transmission. That means more than 100 new cases per 100,000 people in the past 7 days. And on Tuesday, the CDC updated its mask-wearing guidelines, including for those who are fully vaccinated. The agency recommended wearing masks indoors, particularly in regions where transmission is high. The updated CDC guidelines have sparked outrage and confusion for many across the country. The COVID resurgence has reignited a furious debate over mask mandates in Congress.
Speaker, to clarify something from earlier, is Kevin McCarthy a moron, and if so, why?
I said earlier in my comment, science, 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 and science. On almost every subject that you can name, science is the answer. Whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's a health crisis, whether it's our preeminence in the world in technology, science, 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 science. To say that wearing a mask is not based on science, I think is not wise, and that was my comment. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Said that people who are fully vaccinated but don't support wearing a mask are morons. She went on to say that the House should follow the science. Madam Speaker, you don't know the facts nor the science, so let's talk about it. The Speaker is referring to the CDC current recommendation. I just left speaking with Dr. Monahan from the House. He said he used the CDC recommendation on a report that hasn't been printed yet. He did not know that the report is based upon India about a vaccine that's not approved in America. And now he did not know that it didn't even pass peer review. That's why vaccinated people in this House now have to wear a mask. There is no science. But I guess the Speaker must have not known that. Do you know what frustrates Americans the most? Hypocrisy. They hate the idea that you tell people, get vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. First they tell us, don't wear a mask, wear two masks, then they take the mask off.
Israel's President Isaac Herzog received the third dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine today, launching the Jewish state's campaign to give booster shots to people aged over 60. Take a look.
Therefore, I'd like to update you that the expert committee at the Ministry of Health of Israel officially approved the recommendation of giving a third booster dose of the COVID vaccine to Israeli citizens above the age of 60. The decision was based on considerable research and analysis, as well as the rise in risk of the Delta variant wave. Israel has already vaccinated 2,000 immunosuppressed people with a third dose with no severe adverse events. And now we're rolling out a national third dose campaign.
The jabs will begin on Sunday as part of a complementary vaccination campaign for people aged over 60 who were fully vaccinated more than 5 months ago. About 55% of Israel's 9 million population has been double vaccinated, most with Pfizer-BioNTech jab, thanks to a massive campaign launched in late December after an agreement with its producers. Israel has recorded more than 1,400 COVID cases in the past 24 hours. More than 15,000 active cases are currently identified, including 151 people hospitalized in a serious condition, according to the Health Ministry. Case numbers dropped dramatically, and in early June, Israel eased many restrictions, but infections soon rose again, prompting the Health Ministry to reimpose the wearing of masks in enclosed public places. Last month, health officials announced they would open up vaccination to children as young as 12, while earlier this week they said those aged 5 to 11 at risk of serious health complications could be vaccinated from August 1.
Japan extended a virus state of emergency in Tokyo and expanded the measure to 4 more regions as it battles a record surge in infections a week into the pandemic-postponed Olympics. Nationwide, new virus cases topped 10,000 for the first time on Thursday, and a string of government officials and health experts have warned that the more contagious Delta variant is fueling a dangerous surge. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga announced the expansion of the emergency to Chiba, Kanagawa, and Saitama, which neighbor Tokyo, as well as Osaka in western Japan. The decision also means that emergency measures in Tokyo and southern Okinawa that had been due to end August 22nd will now run until the end of the month. The emergency restricts the sale of alcohol in bars and restaurants and shortens their opening hours. And there are questions about whether it will be sufficient. Prime Minister Suga warned that the highly infectious Delta variant is rapidly taking over, and if the increase in infected people does not come down, we could see the number of people in serious condition rise and hospitals overwhelmed. Olympic organizers, meanwhile, reported 27 new cases related to the event on Friday, including 3 athletes, bringing the total this month to 225. Just 98 of the cases involved people coming from abroad of the 39,800 who have come to Japan, according to organizers.
A coronavirus cluster that emerged in the Chinese city of Nanjing has now reached 5 provinces and Beijing, forcing lockdowns on hundreds of thousands of people as authorities scramble to stamp out the worst outbreak in months. The city reported a total of 184 local coronavirus cases today after 9 cleaners at Nanjing Lukou International Airport tested positive on July 20. At least 206 infections nationwide have been linked to the Nanjing cluster, which officials have confirmed as the highly transmissible Delta variant. Hundreds of thousands have been locked down in Jiangsu province, of which Nanjing is the capital, while the city has tested all 9.2 million residents twice. In Beijing's Changping district, where 2 locally transmitted cases have been found, 41,000 people in 9 housing communities were placed under lockdown lockdown Thursday, according to city officials. The infections are the first local cases reported in the capital in 6 months. The outbreak is geographically the largest in several months, challenging China's aggressive containment efforts, which have relied on mass testing, lockdowns, and swift contact tracing.
Speaking at a global education summit in London, the UK's Foreign Secretary says fundraising targets could result in life-changing differences in recipient countries. Janelle Kasuga of our EBC UK Bureau has that story. Janelle.
Thank you. And on Wednesday, the UK government announced that those travelling from the United States and European countries, aside from France, can travel to England without having to quarantine on arrival. Let's listen in.
It's an ambitious set of targets, but if we can raise $4 billion at this summit, $5 billion over the full 5 years, we can make a life-changing difference in those countries affected, but also to peace, stability in those continents, because it's a game changer. But actually, I think it's a confident and safe and careful step the UK is making, and we want to get opened up to international travel. It's in our interest, but of course we also want to open up safely and securely with other key high-trust partners around the world. America's one of them, but there are many others. At home, you have to have one of the licensed vaccines in the US under the FDA, or if they're coming from Europe under the EU's licensed regulator, the EMA, and I'm afraid under those circumstances there will be some vaccines that are just not reliable.
This policy will come into force from 4 a.m. 0300 Greenwich Mean Time on August the 2nd. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps tweeted that this will help reunite people living in the US and European countries with their family and friends. Travelers fully jabbed with a vaccine approved by the US Food and Drug Administration or the European Medicines Agency will be able to travel from any country on the British government's amber traffic list, without having to self-isolate at home for 10 days. They will still need to do a pre-departure test and take another test on day 2 after arriving in England. Separate rules will continue to apply for those arriving from France due to the government's concern over the persistent presence of the Beta variant, which is believed to be more resistant to vaccines. Those travelling from an amber-list country, which includes most of Europe and the US, who are not fully vaccinated will still have to quarantine on arrival. The government also confirmed the restart of international cruises. Britain is in the midst of another wave of the virus due to the Delta variant, although case numbers have dropped over the past week. While its vaccine drive has seen more than 70% of adults fully jabbed, Scotland, which is in charge of its own travel rules, later said that it was also getting rid of quarantine requirements for jabbed travellers from the US and EU. Wales and Northern Ireland also set their own health policies and decide their own foreign travel rules, but are consulting with London over a UK-wide policy. Back to you, CJ.
Thank you so much, Janelle, for your report. Please do take care over there, and we're looking forward to more stories from you.
Thank you for having me. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Janelle Kasuga. We live in interesting times.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by North Luzon Express Terminal.
Mamang sorbetero, tayo sumayaw, kalimbang mong hawak, muling ikaw ay batang munti sa'yo'y naghihintay, biglang ligaya ngayong tagkaraw. Mamang sorbetero, tayo sumayaw, kalimbang mong hawak, muling ikaw ay mainit na labi, nagbabagang mata, sunog na pag-ibig, parang hawa mo na. Mamang sorbetero, anong ngalan mo? Tinda mo nga ice cream, gustong gusto ko.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. President Duterte has restored a pact governing the presence of U.S. troops in the Philippines. Philippine Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana said that the VFA was in full force again. The VFA provides rules for the rotation of thousands of U.S. troops in and out of the Philippines for war drills and exercises. Take a look.
Last night, after the meeting between Secretary Austin and the President, after Secretary left Malacanang, the President decided to recall or retract the termination letter for the VFA. So the VFA is in full force again. There is no termination letter pending, and we are back on track with the Secretary to plan for future exercises under the VFA.
I also reaffirmed America's commitment to supporting a sovereign and secure Philippines and to building an even more capable alliance together. We also talked about how we can work toward a free and open Indo-Pacific rooted in a rules-based international order, a region in which countries work together to realize their highest aspirations. Now, I'm especially grateful for our long-standing U.S.-Philippines Visiting Forces Agreement, which enables us to respond swiftly and seamlessly to disasters or crises. You know, coming here is personally very powerful for me. My father served proudly in the Philippines during World War II as a corporal in the United States Army Air Corps. He was one of many American and Filipino service members who fought side by side to defeat aggression and secure freedom in the Pacific. And later today, I'll visit the Manila American Cemetery, where many of the Filipino and American veterans who fought during World War II are buried, shoulder to shoulder, just as they served. And we will continue to stand with the Filipino people, just as we stood together 8 decades ago, side by side, arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, Balakatan.
Now, this move comes with tensions growing in the hotly contested South China Sea, where Beijing's growing assertiveness has raised alarm. China claims almost all of the resource-rich sea, through which trillions of dollars in trade passes annually, with competing claims from Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. The VFA, a 1998 defense deal between Manila and Washington, allows American forces to enter the Philippines sans passport and visa to allow them to participate in joint military drills in the host country. The two countries are currently holding talks to come up with a side agreement that will serve as an addendum to the VFA. During a meeting at the Malacanang, President Duterte and Mr. Austin agreed that enhanced communication and greater cooperation can further boost Manila and Washington's alliance.
The Taliban's capture of a key Afghan-Pakistan border post has hiked trucking costs between the two countries, with insurgents and government officials taxing traders for their goods and demanding bribes to allow them through. Thousands of vehicles cross daily from Chaman in southwestern Pakistan to Spin Boldak on the other side, carrying goods destined for Kandahar, Afghanistan's second biggest city. Take a look.
کندهار د دغه څه چې موږ رابار کو د باغوسه یار خلاصه کندهار په ګمرک کې مسول ورکوه په 4000 افغانۍ باندې یو پټه راکوي دغه ځکه چې سره روان سو پر لارې باندې دغه پوستې چې دي درې ځا پیسې غواړي یو پر ارغسانې غواړي پر انځرګي باندې غواړي پر میل باندې غواړي زای 2000 زای زر زای 15000 غواړي اشکنزل و دغه خلا الته پرېږده چې وایي دغه ځکه چې رالو طالبانو ته دلته بولدک ته شرا ورسېد ولدا کې بیا طالبانو 2000 افغانۍ را څخه دي پر څو بجې کې سره دغه دی او आवाज ده 12
A Hong Kong waiter was jailed for 9 years today after he became the first person convicted under a sweeping new national security law that Beijing imposed on the city to stamp out dissent. Tong Ying Kit, 24, on Tuesday was found guilty of terrorism for driving a motorbike into the 3 police officers and secession for flying a protest flag during a rally on July 1 last year, the day after the security law was enacted. The flag Tong flew read, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," an ubiquitous chant during the huge and often violent pro-democracy protests 2 years ago. Those judges ruled that Tong driving his bike into police met the bar for terrorism, while the flag he flew was capable of inciting secession. They sentenced him to a total of 9 years, saying his offenses were of a serious nature but were not the worst case of its kind. Tong's legal team told AFP they plan to appeal.
6 months after Myanmar coup, pandemic has paused the resistance, according to an analyst. Manny Mong, a Myanmar researcher for Human Rights Watch, said people don't have the economy or the budget or the money to keep going, and now many of them are sick. Take a look.
The pandemic now has really paused the resistance a little bit. But it has definitely changed the way in which this resistance is happening. I mean, people are far more worried about COVID-19 at the moment. We know that there are some who are still training with the PDF. We know that there's still resistance happening, and we certainly know that there's guerrilla activity happening around the cities. I mean, every day there are protests, and quite often we're hearing about these small bombs going off around the cities as well. So it doesn't mean that people have given up, but certainly I don't think we're seeing the same loud campaigning that was happening at the very beginning. And of course, people are tired. This has been going on for almost 6 months now. People don't have the economy or the budget or the money to keep going. The biggest worry, of course, is that the Myanmar people are going to slide more and more into devastation and poverty.
The military has killed almost 1,000 people in a running crackdown on dissent, a local monitoring group says, with thousands more arrested. Tens of thousands of civil servants and other workers have either been sacked or joining protests or are still on strike in support of a nationwide civil disobedience campaign. A coronavirus outbreak has overwhelmed the healthcare system, with many hospitals empty due to a work boycott by pro-democracy medical staff.
In other news, as thick clouds of smoke billow across the vast Siberian region of Yakutia, Yegor Sakharov and his team are now racing to stop its smoldering forest from burning even more. Take a look.
Конечно, важно. Если нас не было бы, все сгорело бы, думаю. Мы как бы стараемся, да? Много делаем, правда. Правда. Много делаем, много работаем. Чтобы огонь не распространялся, населенные пункты там не сгорели, например.
Members of Russia's Aerial Forest Protection Service, his team spent a recent July evening patrolling a 5-kilometer trench they had dug at the edge of the village of BSQL to keep an approaching wildfire at bay. The team has lost track of how many blazes they have tackled since late May, mostly successfully, sometimes not, as Yakutia suffers through yet another even worsening wildfire season. Fueled by summer's heat waves, wildfires have swept through more than 1.5 million hectares of Yakutia's swampy, coniferous taiga, with more than a month still to go in Siberia's annual fire season. Environmentalists have long argued that Russia underfunds its forest firefighting capabilities. The country's environment ministry is itself open about the policy in 2015, issuing a decree that allows regions to ignore blazes if the cost of fighting fires outweighs the expected damages.
Eagle News will be back with more stories. Please don't go away.
Protect yourself and loved ones. Use Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant that kills 500 strains of bacteria, fungi, and viruses such as coronavirus and other disease-causing microorganisms. Also potent against viruses in pets. It kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes. Dissolve 1 teaspoon in 1 liter of water. Apply on areas for disinfection or use it for misting. Protect Plus Gold.
Taus-pusong pagbati po sa lahat ng kapatiran ng Iglesia ni Cristo sa buong mundo sa ika-107 anibersaryo ng INC. Binabati ko din po ang inyong Executive Minister na si Ka Eduardo V. Manalo. Maraming salamat po sa lahat ng inyong ginagawa para sa bayan, lalo na sa overseas Filipinos. Mabuhay po kayo.
Welcome back to the news. The Court of Tax Appeals, or CTA, has turned down a petition for review filed by Philippine Airlines, which sought for a refund of the 4.49 million pesos in excise taxes for the importation of various liquors and wines as part of its in-flight and commissary supplies from October 2012 to March 2013. The CTA First Division denied for lack of merit the petition for review filed by PAL, according to a 23-page decision dated July 29 and written by Associate Justice Catherine Manahan. The court said PAL failed to present sufficient and convincing evidence to prove that the imported products were not locally available in reasonable quantity, quality, or price at the time of importation, which the court said was a condition which would have entitled the transaction to tax exemption under Presidential Decree 1590, the law that granted its franchise in June 1978. The law required PAL to pay corporate income tax in lieu of all other taxes, duties, royalties, registration, license, and other fees and charges. The exemption included commissary and catering supplies, provided that such articles or materials are imported for the use of PAL in its transport operations and other activities incidental thereto and are not locally available.
IAG, the owner of British Airways and Iberia, said today that it narrowed its net loss in the first half, but continued to face fallout from the pandemic. The London-listed conglomerate said in a statement that it suffered a loss after taxation of 2 billion euros or $2.4 billion in the 6 months to the end of June. That was almost half the group's net loss of 3.8 billion euros in the same period a year earlier when the pandemic erupted and ravaged air travel. Revenues remain severely depressed by the pandemic, down 60% at 2.2 billion euros.
Meanwhile, Air France-KLM said that it narrowed its loss in the second quarter and saw the first signs of recovery in the aviation sector as countries ease coronavirus restrictions and vaccination campaigns continue apace. The French-Dutch airline said in a statement that it booked a bottom-line net loss of 1.5 billion euros or $1.8 billion in the period from April to June, narrower than the 2.6 billion euros for the same period a year before. Thanks to the easing of travel restrictions in several key regions, the second quarter of 2021 saw the first signs of the long-awaited recovery, according to Chief Executive Benjamin Smith. Air France-KLM said the reopening of the North Atlantic for American citizens to visit Europe also resulted in an improved booking trend.
In action in the Tokyo Olympics, China's Wang Xun claimed the men's 200-meter individual medley gold medal Friday, becoming the event's first new Olympic champion since 2000 after the retirement of four-time winner Michael Phelps. Wang touched in 1 minute 55 seconds ahead of Britain's Duncan Scott, 1 minute 55.28 seconds, and Switzerland's Jeremy Desplanche. American Michael Andrew boasted this year's fastest time coming into Tokyo, but could only manage fifth, while there was more disappointment for Japan's defending world champion Daya Seto, who came fourth. Seto was one of the clear favorites to win the 400-meter individual medley earlier this week, but failed even to make the final. Wang was the top seed for the 200-meter after an impressive showing in the semifinal, and his pedigree goes further back after he won bronze, both at Rio 2016 and at the 2017 World Championships. Scott pushed Wang close, finishing less than half a second behind the Chinese to smash the British record and collect his third medal in Japan after taking silver in the 200-meter freestyle and gold in the 4x200-meter relay.
South African Tatiana Schoenmaker said it felt so unreal after she smashed the long-standing women's 200-meter breaststroke world record to win Olympic gold yesterday. Schoenmaker timed 2 minutes 18.95 seconds to better the 2 minutes 19.11 set by Denmark's Rick Møller Pedersen in 2013. It made her the first female South African to win an Olympic swimming gold since 1996 when Penny Haynes swept the women's 100-meter and 200-meter breaststroke. Schoenmaker wore a look of disbelief as she looked up at the results board before breaking into tears as she was embraced by her rivals at the Tokyo Aquatics Center. This was Schoenmaker's first Olympics after she just missed out on qualification for Rio. The 24-year-old won silver in the 100-meter event and signaled her intent for the world record by going close in the heats. It was the third world record in the Tokyo pool, but the first in an individual event after Australia's women set a new mark in the 4x100-meter relay, and China did the same in the women's 4x200-meter relay. America's Lily King was second in 2 minutes 19.92 seconds, with her teammate and training partner Annie Laser third in 2 minutes and 20.84 seconds.
And Caleb Dressel became the first man to break 50 seconds in the 100-meter butterfly at the Olympic Games today, winning the event's second semifinals in 49.71. It's the third fastest time in history, according to an NBC report. Only Dressel himself has gone quicker. His world record set at the 2019 World Championship stands at 49.50. Hungary's Krzysztof Milak, the 200-meter butterfly gold medalist, raced in the first semifinal and went 50.31 for a matter of minutes. That time stood as an Olympic record. Dressel took gold in the men's 100 freestyle on Wednesday. American Dressel missed out on the sprint medals at Rio in 2016, but he has since exploded, winning an incredible 13 titles over the past 2 World Championships to be an imposing force.
An expert in sports psychology comments on Japan's Naomi Osaka and USA's Simone Biles speaking out about their mental health around the time of the Olympics. Take a look.
大会の時期にそのことを告白されたということが大きなインパクトを与えたと思います。で、特にバイルズ選手の場合は大会の途中でそういったことを表明されたということで、かなりギリギリの状況でやってこられたということを感じざるを得ないなと思いました。試合の場の中で強ければいい、勝てばいいということがアスリートに求められたかもしれませんが、今はその試合の場を離れたとしても一人の人間として社会人として社会に影響を与えるポジティブな強い存在であることが求められていると感じます。ただ今回の大会が非常に特殊な状況で行われているということは忘れてはいけないと思います。
First, it was Naomi Osaka. Now, weeks later, a tearful Simone Biles. 2 of the biggest names in sport have publicly revealed that they are struggling with their mental health and they could be the catalyst for wider change. The superstar American gymnast Biles on Tuesday stunned the Tokyo Olympics when she pulled out of the women's team final, saying, "I have to do what's right for me and focus on my mental health and not jeopardize my health and my well-being." The 24-year-old had already hinted that she was feeling immense pressure in the Japanese capital, writing on Instagram, "I truly do feel like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders at times." On Wednesday, Biles also pulled out of the all-around final, and her participation in the rest of the Olympics is uncertain.
And finally, even as the pandemic enters its second year, members of the Iglesia ni Cristo or Church of Christ in the Hawaii Pacific are not showing any sign of slowing down in helping others in need. In fact, they've also restored one of the church's historic landmark in their part of the world. Our EBC Hawaii Pacific has this feature.
houses surrounding the area maintain the historical features of the place. And so when we complete this project, it will showcase not only to the church member but throughout the neighborhood.
Initiatives like this alleviate the pain and suffering of our unemployed. So whether we're opening tomorrow or whether in 2 weeks, I think is beside the point because in the interim, our people need help. And organizations like Church of Christ or Iglesia ni Cristo really should be commended for having you folks do your part, doing your fair share of helping the needy.
So the food drive is wonderful because it helps those families who now have more mouths to feed. And so I thank you, Brother Eduardo, for having this wonderful idea of having a food drive.
The aid to humanity projects of the church are not a new thing. The church has been striving to help our fellow men all over the world before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and even after the pandemic is over.
Thank you, Hawaii team.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. See you back tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live
in interesting times.
This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.